মহান বিজয় দিবসে স্বপ্নঘুরি অনুষ্ঠানের দর্শকদের শুভেচ্ছা জানাচ্ছি। আমরা শ্রদ্ধা জানাচ্ছি মহান শহীদদের, যাদের আত্মত্যাগের বিনিময়ে আমরা আমাদের বাংলাদেশকে পেয়েছি। মহান বিজয় দিবসে সেই সাথে আমরা স্মরণ করছি সকল মুক্তিযোদ্ধাদের, যারা বাংলাদেশের স্বাধীনতা ছিনিয়ে এনেছিলেন। 50 বছর পেরিয়ে যাওয়ার পর আমরা আমাদের প্রজন্ম বাংলাদেশকে প্রাণ ভরে উপভোগ করছে। আপনারা জানেন যে স্বপ্নঘুরি অনুষ্ঠানে আমরা এমন ব্যক্তিত্বদের নিয়ে কথা বলি, যারা আমাদের স্বপ্নের ঘুড়ি ওড়াতে সাহায্য করেছিলেন। আমরা শৈশবে যে ঘুড়ি উড়িয়েছিলাম, যে চিন্তা করেছিলাম দেশকে গড়ার, পৃথিবীকে গড়ার, সেই ঘুড়িকে তারা উড়িয়ে দিয়েছিলেন কিংবা তারা নিজেও উড়িয়েছিলেন। আজকে আমরা বিশাল মহীরুহ মাপের একজন ব্যক্তিত্বকে আপনাদের সামনে নিয়ে আসব। তিনি তার পেশাগত কারণে সারা বিশ্বে পরিচিত। তার আবিষ্কার বহু মানুষের প্রাণ বাঁচাচ্ছে এবং বাঁচিয়েছে, কিন্তু তার পাশাপাশি তার আরেকটা অসাধারণ পরিচয় রয়েছে। তিনি বাংলাদেশের মুক্তিযুদ্ধে বাংলার মানুষকে সাহায্য করেছিলেন এবং সেজন্যে তিনি বাংলাদেশের সরকারের তরফ থেকে বাংলাদেশের বন্ধু পুরস্কার পেয়েছেন। 2012 সালে বাংলাদেশের প্রধানমন্ত্রী এবং বাংলাদেশের রাষ্ট্রপতির হাত থেকে তিনি সেই পুরস্কার নিয়েছেন এবং সেই সাথে তাকে আরো অন্যান্য রাষ্ট্রীয় পুরস্কারেও ভূষিত করা হয়েছে। কথা না বাড়িয়ে আসুন পরিচিত হই আমাদের আজকের স্বপ্ন ঘুড়ি ওড়ানোর সেই বিশাল ব্যক্তিত্ব, প্রফেসর ডক্টর উইলিয়াম বি গ্রিনো। আসসালামু আলাইকুম প্রফেসর গ্রিনো, কেমন আছেন?
আসসালামু আলাইকুম, আমি ভালো আছি। আপনি ভালো আছেন?
আমি ভালো আছি। আপনি খুব সুন্দর বাংলা বলছেন এবং মহান বিজয় দিবসে আপনাকে শুভেচ্ছা জানাচ্ছি আবারও, এবং আবারও ধন্যবাদ আপনি আমাদের দেশের জন্য যা করেছেন। আজকে আমরা সবকিছু আপনার কাছে শুনবো, বাট আসুন আগে আমি আপনাকে পরিচয় করিয়ে দিচ্ছি আমার দর্শকদের কাছে। ওয়েলকাম টু স্বপ্নঘুরি, ডক্টর গ্রিনো। Professor William B. Greenough is the Professor Emeritus of Medicine of Johns Hopkins University. তিনি জনস হপকিন্স ইউনিভার্সিটি, বল্টিমোর, ম্যারিল্যান্ড, মার্কিন যুক্তরাষ্ট্রে প্রফেসর এমেরিটাস মেডিসিনে। তিনি মেডিকেল স্কুল থেকে শিক্ষা সমাপ্ত করেন, মেডিকেল শিক্ষা, এবং সেখানে উনি ট্রেনিং গ্রহণ করেন। তার মেডিকেল বিদ্যায় বা মেডিকেল বিজ্ঞানে তার অবদানের জন্য তাকে বাদশাহ ফয়সাল অ্যাওয়ার্ড দেয়া হয়েছে তার ডায়রিয়াল ডিজিজ এর উপরে তার আবিষ্কারের জন্য। এবং এছাড়া তিনি ডক্টর ডোনাল্ড থমাস, তার সাথে কাজ করেছেন এনআইএইচ এ, আমি যতদূর জানি। এবং ডক্টর ডোনাল্ড থমাসই পরবর্তীতে নোবেল পুরস্কার পান লিউকিমিয়া বা ব্লাড ক্যান্সারের তার আবিষ্কার, বোন ম্যারো ট্রান্সপ্লান্টেশন, এই আবিষ্কারটার জন্য তার সাথে প্রফেসর গ্রিনো কাজ করেছেন তরুণ বয়সে। প্রফেসর গ্রিনো আবিষ্কারের মধ্যে রয়েছে তিনি মেডিকেল একটা গ্রুপের সাথে আবিষ্কার করেছেন যে কলেরা টক্সিন কিভাবে কাজ করে, এই রোগটা কিভাবে আমাদের শরীরের ভেতরে কাজ করে। এবং তার আরেকটা গৌরবজনক অধ্যায় হচ্ছে বা গল্প হচ্ছে যে তিনি বাংলাদেশের মহাখালীতে, যেটা তখন কলেরা হসপিটাল ছিল, সেখানে নভেম্বর মাসের 29 তারিখে, খুব সম্ভবত 1962 সালে, বহু বছর আগে, প্রথম যে রোগী, কলেরা রোগী, সেটা তিনি ভর্তি করেন। তিনি তখন ডিরেক্টর, তিনি তখন সেখানে কাজ করতেন। আগেই বলেছি যে in 1984 Professor Greenough was awarded the King Faisal International Prize in Medicine for his research on diarrhea with John S. Fortran and Dr. Michael Field. For his service to children, UNICEF awarded ICDDRB in 1984 the gold medal, and he was the director of ICDDRB, or Cholera Hospital, in 1983. So during his time, UNICEF awarded the gold medal. He also received the Maurice Pate Prize in 1984. He was He received the Howard Florey Award and Memorial Lecture at the University of Adelaide in Australia, as well as the 2006 Paul G. Rogers Society Award. He is regarded as the ambassador for global health research. In 2007, he received the Outstanding Service Award from Bangladesh American Foundation. And in 2012, Professor Greenough was awarded the Friends of Liberation War and Honor Award by the Prime Minister and the President of Bangladesh. যে কথাটা আমি আগেই বলেছি যে 2012 সালে প্রফেসর ডক্টর গ্রিনো ফ্রেন্ডস অফ লিবারেশন ওয়ার সম্মান পেয়েছেন বাংলাদেশ থেকে, বাংলাদেশের প্রধানমন্ত্রী এবং বাংলাদেশের প্রেসিডেন্টের হাত থেকে। He also received the Mary Betty Stevens Award for Excellence in Clinical Investigation Prize from American College of Physicians in 2012, and the Arnold P. Gold Foundation Humanism in Medicine Award from American Geriatric Society in 2014. Welcome again, Professor Greenough. We would like to start this discussion. I know that you have a huge lifespan and huge of contributions to medicine, but you also contributed to the independence of Bangladesh. We would like to start our conversation with your contribution to our independence. How did you get involved?
Thank you for this opportunity. And what I'd like to say to start with is that there's been an independent history written about the contribution we made to helping Bangladesh achieve independence by actually a New Zealand historian who studied and wrote the book at Columbia University. His name is Samuel Jaffe. It's called An Internal Matter. And what happened during the war after the attack on the Dhaka University, I was in the United States by that time, having left Bangladesh before it was Bangladesh, East Pakistan. I returned to National Institutes of Health in 1965. But my colleagues, particularly John Rhodey, Henry Mosley, and the other staff at the then cholera hospital, it was called in Bangladesh, it was actually termed the Pakistan Southeast Asia Treaty Organization Cholera Hospital. Cholera Research Hospital. They were present, and particularly the Rhodys could see what was happening on the night of the attack on, I think it was March 25th. And they went down and saw the devastation and the many victims of the attack of Pakistan, initially on Dhaka University. And they took films, which unfortunately were confiscated before they could be smuggled out to get to the global papers. So the history of all of this is very objectively written. And so what I'm talking about, for anyone who wants to in more depth, should go ahead and read Sam Jaffe's book. That's published in Bangladesh. We have to get it through Amazon here. As soon as the event on the disaster when the Pakistan Army attacked the university on the night of horror, we heard about it through contact with the people who remained at the Cholera Research Laboratory. We were horrified, and we wondered what to do. And we understood at that time that the United States government was supplying funds and arms to Pakistan, and they were being used against the Bangladeshi population. I also had friends at the university who actually, several of them had to walk out of Bangladesh in order to escape the slaughter. So our sources of information were people at the Cholera Research Laboratory that stayed during the early phase of the war. I particularly mentioned Dr. Rhodey and Dr. Mosley. And the second was the Father Tim, who was absolutely invaluable in forwarding direct on-the-ground photographs and information. And the question was how we could get that information into our legislature. And at that time, our president was Richard Nixon, and his Secretary of State was Henry Kissinger. And they were showing photographs of DACA the year before, showing everything was normal. They were running a disinformation campaign that covered up the fact that they were supplying American weapons to Pakistan, and we knew it was a lie. And the question was how to defeat that lie. For that reason, we decided the thing to do was to collect directly from what was then still East Pakistan, as much on-the-ground data, photographs, individual anecdotes, and so forth, and feed them into the Senate and the House of Representatives, and attempt to have the money supporting arms shipments that came through the Foreign Assistance Act of 1971 to block it and stop the arms flows. And initially, we went in and knew nothing about lobbying, but we were advised by Senator Kennedy's staff and Senator Saxby's staff and Frank Church's staff how to go about it. And it was clear we needed to have a place next to the Senate and House office building. So we established what was called the Bangladesh Information Center. I was designated president, but most of the work was done by many, many people going through the center. It was Dr. David Nayland, who actually is the only American I think speaks fluent Bangladeshi up to the present time through Bangla. David Weisbrod, who was a young man who was interested in what was happening in the foreign affairs, and Kaiser Zaman, a Bangladeshi, who later on went to work with the United Nations High Commission for Refugees. They were the people who really did the work. And then when the people, the roadies, were evacuated from Bangladesh during the war, Candy Rodi, John Rodi's wife, set up a very efficient system so that anyone coming in to lobby for Bangladesh against American arms shipments to Pakistan would have information cards they could take with them to their particular senator or representative, and would be up to speed with lobbying. That also was used heavily by Bangladeshis that came to lobby on behalf of the country and the liberation of Bangladesh. And Mr. Muhis was very important, particularly after they left the Pakistan embassy. I remember being on the street on Massachusetts Avenue when they defected with the Bangladeshi staff. So that is the background of how we got involved. The Bangladesh Information Center was not allowed to shut down after Bangladesh was liberated because Nixon and Kissinger were very annoyed at having their fabrications made naked before the Senate and House of Representatives. Anecdotally, Senator Kennedy held hearings in the Refugee Committee, and as the senior members of the State Department said everything was normal in Bangladesh, we were able to show pictures on the ground of people fleeing to India, and things like guns on the UNICEF vehicles, and the many people who were killed. We had the information so that the then increasing crowd at the hearings of Kennedy would laugh at representatives of the U.S. government when they told their lies. So the Bangladesh Information Center was basically a clearinghouse for current information on the ground from what was actually going on, starting with the devastation in Dhaka University, and then later with the achievements of Mukti Bahini and right through the whole war. After the war, when Bangladesh was liberated, I was not allowed to shut down the Bangladesh Information Center because Kissinger and Nixon were so annoyed with the blockage of the Foreign Assistance Act. No money could be taken to buy more arms to Pakistan once the Foreign Assistance Act of 1971 was blocked by Congress.
So, Dr. Greenough, would you please tell more about this act and what was the unique thing that you did? But before you coming to the point, let me summarize what you just said to my audience, that
Yes.
Dr. William Greenough Bangladesh Information Center যে তথ্য কেন্দ্র যুদ্ধ চলাকালীন সময়ে উনি আমেরিকাতেই ছিলেন এবং যুদ্ধ চলাকালীন সময়ে বাংলাদেশ ইনফরমেশন সেন্টার সাংঘাতিক একটা রোল প্লে করে। সেই তারা বিভিন্ন রকমের অত্যাচারের এবং এই জঘন্য হত্যাকাণ্ড এই সমস্ত কিছুর তথ্য এবং ছবি তারা আমেরিকায় বসে সংগ্রহ করেন এবং সেই তথ্য এবং ছবিগুলো মার্কিন যুক্তরাষ্ট্রের যে সেনেট রয়েছে সেই সেনেটে তারা লবি করেন যে এই হত্যাযজ্ঞ বন্ধ করার জন্য এবং এখান থেকে যে যদি কোনো আর্মস শিপমেন্ট হতো সেগুলো যেন বন্ধ করার জন্য তারা সাংঘাতিক ভূমিকা পালন করেছেন এবং ডক্টর গ্রিনো ওয়াজ দ্য প্রেসিডেন্ট অফ বাংলাদেশি ইনফরমেশন সেন্টার, যদিও তার সাথে অনেকে তখন কাজ করেছেন এই বাংলাদেশি ইনফরমেশন সেন্টারটাকে, বাংলাদেশ ইনফরমেশন সেন্টারটাকে 1971 সালে মার্কিন যুক্তরাষ্ট্রে চালু রাখার জন্য। Let's continue, Dr. Greenough, and we would like to invite you to say a few more words about this special act. What does it mean, and what was the unique thing or great thing that you did? The cancellation of the act, what did it happen and how did it happen, and what was the impact of this?
The Foreign Assistance Act was what gave contracts to the people who made the weapons for shipments to Pakistan and supplying all the military equipment to the army of Pakistan. And the contractors were the main weapons dealers who made arms for the U.S. And we felt that if we could block the money to going to the contractors through blocking the Foreign Assistance Act, that would stop the arms shipments. And no one thought that a group of people who were not paid lobbyists would be able to do that. And it was actually due to the many on the ground, as the war went on, we had more and more people that had been on the ground in Bangladesh who were through the Bangladesh folks here in the U.S., Muhith coordinating their going to and learning how to lobby our Congress, plus the many Americans that were upset by this disinformation campaign and what was happening in then East Pakistan. So the information center became the center for data that could counteract the lies that were flowing daily into the Senate and the House from the Nixon administration through Henry Kissinger and the State Department. And so the way to stop arms shipments was to block money to those who provided both the weapons and the money to ship them. That was, and as it turned out, I think in the 20th century, the blockage of the Foreign Assistance Act of 1971 was a unique event. It had not happened before. And it was not thought by the professional lobbyists that a group of ragtag academics and Bangladeshis would have any influence on Congress and the House. But as it turned out, we had some pressure points. One of them was that we could have bipartisan Republican and Democratic unity in fighting to block the act. Dr. John Rhodey had roomed at college with Senator Saxby's son. Senator Saxby was a Republican, and we had contact directly with Senator Kennedy's staff, who educated us about lobbying. The lobbying work was not done so much by myself as by the people who flowed through the information center and had organized data, often only 24 hours old, that they could present to the staffs of the House of Representatives and of the Senate. The key senators were obviously Kennedy, Senator Saxby and Frank Church, and they immediately realized that there was a disinformation campaign, and came over quickly to understanding that there was no way that the Pakistan army could control a country separated by thousands of miles across the Indian subcontinent, and that it would end up even being a feudal war with many, many deaths. And by that time, we had in the order of 9 million refugees flowing into India. I would point out that the second largest refugee event of the 20th century was the Bangladesh War. And the reason it's not known now is it was reversed so quickly. So within a few months, when Bangladesh won the war, the refugees came back to their home country. So no one learns about it anymore. And I'm indebted to Sam Jaffe, the historian, to put that on the map. We set up the structure, particularly David Nayland, John Rhodey, Kaiser Zaman, to educate lobbyists and direct them to the pressure points of the senators and the representatives in the House of Representatives to gather the necessary votes to overcome the Foreign Assistance Act, would provide the money for arms for Pakistan, as well as all other arms that we were shipping to other parts of the world. So
right.
We've done a good deed to other countries as well. I don't know. So that's in a very nutshell. The details of it are in the book by Sam Jaffe. There are also some pictures in the book of while all this was going on, there were people protesting in front of the White House, both Bangladeshis and members, particularly of the cholera lab. They were by that time. And my colleagues at Hopkins and my wife, we were down in front of the White House. At that time, you could sit and protest in front of the White House without getting tear gas.
Trouble.
So it was a different time. So in a nutshell, that's how it worked. And they underestimated what could be accomplished by this kind of direct grassroots lobbying. The paid lobbyists for the arms manufacturers and the people who needed money for the companies to make these and ship them, didn't think we were amounted to anything. And so it was quite a shock toward the end of the year in October, November, when they realized that they had lost the votes, that the act was going to be blocked. But they came in too late with their funds and other methods. We didn't have any money, so we couldn't take people out to fancy places or anything like that. This was absolutely. I mean, our budget at the information center was less than $5,000 for the whole period.
Yeah, that was very meager amount.
Yeah, so it worked, and it shows how grassroots. Both, and the other very interesting is when people escape from Bangladesh, and when the Bangladeshi delegation defected from the Pakistan embassy, this gave huge impetus for the Americans, who were relatively few, in being able to lobby and have eyewitness accounts. Mr. Muhith, in taking the Bangladesh staff out of the Pakistan, defecting from the embassy, was a key event. And I remember we from the information center received him on the walk on Massachusetts Avenue when he left. It was fortunately a nice sunny day, and they walked out. The other thing that was important was the press. And there were two elements of that. One was the White House protests. Anna Taylor had fasted in front of the White House for several weeks. The second was that we attempted to blockade the ships that had arms. The Quakers from Philadelphia, Richard Taylor, had organized. The one I participated in was in the Baltimore harbor on the ship called the Padma, and this brought it up into the local press. But it brought into the national press a front page article on the New York Times when some really brave Bangladeshi who was still working in the embassy at a lower level job, a woman.
You mean the then Pakistan embassy who were working?
Yeah, Pakistan embassy was able to smuggle out. I think Muhith arranged and organized all this and should be given the credit for it. But she smuggled out, I wish I had the name of that person. She's my hero. But smuggled out the actual bills of lading of arms being shipped to Pakistan. And I found them on my doorstep in Baltimore at 6:30 one morning and immediately recognized what they were and took them down to the New York Times. This was all organized, and Muhith should get the credit for it. But the investigative reporter was named Tad Schultz, SZULC, and
from New York Times.
Nothing happened for several days after we gave these documents to the New York Times, and I thought, well, maybe they're not doing anything. But what happened was that Tad Schultz took photographers to the ships that were about to ship arms to Pakistan that were docked in New Jersey. He went on board and they took photographs of the actual arms being shipped. And that broke as a story in the front page of the New York Times.
Wow.
The end of that week. I don't remember the exact date, but it's currently in the archives. That really brought it up to a national visible level for everyone. And I think that heroic act of getting the bills of lading, showing arms were still being shipped to Pakistan despite all the denials and disinformation, was a very important event in the media.
Absolutely.
And that, of course, then the much more prominent events happened. The concert for Bangladesh and so forth came later, and also bolstered that this wasn't simply a backwater problem. It was a serious global problem. And by that time, it was clear that Bangladesh was not going to be conquered by Pakistan. And
of course,
the Mukti Bahini were at work doing marvelous things. The anecdote I liked best that we got was that they had no explosives from the villages. And to block the railroads, the village people go out at night and lift up the railroad tracks and throw them in the local pond, so I knew where they were. It was actually much more effective than blowing them up. And after the war, they could just go get the rails and put them back on. So the genius of the Bangladesh village people and Mukti Bahini was marvelous.
Absolutely, আমাদের বীর মুক্তি বাহিনী.
In fact, I personally feel that even if the Indian Army hadn't come in, the war would have been won. It would have taken longer. More people would have died. But so there's no question that having the Indian Army come in was shortened the war. But I think the war would have been won by Bangladeshis, the Mukti Bahini. By the time the Indian Army came in, the army could hardly leave the cantonment, and they would have been starved out. So, my personal belief, I don't know whether it's in the history books, but I always...
it's a good observation, Dr. Greenough, maybe.
Also, I would note that General Aurora's classmate from Sandhurst was running the war in Bangladesh. So
Okay.
one could argue that maybe he went in to rescue his classmate, but that's probably
Yeah, maybe you never know. Please allow me to summarize whatever you just mentioned. ডক্টর গ্রিনো এতক্ষণ বললেন যে বাংলাদেশ ইনফরমেশন সেন্টার কিভাবে কাজ করেছে এবং তারা যে ইউনিক কাজটা করতে পেরেছিলেন মার্কিন যুক্তরাষ্ট্রের সিনেট এবং কংগ্রেসে চাপ প্রয়োগ করে লবিং করে তারা এই যে যুদ্ধাস্ত্র যেগুলো তখন এখান থেকে যাচ্ছিল সেই যুদ্ধাস্ত্র শিপমেন্টটা বন্ধ করতে তারা সক্ষম হয়েছেন। ডক্টর গ্রিনো বারবারই একটা নাম উচ্চারণ করছেন, নামটা আমাদের খুব পরিচিত, মুহিত বলছেন। ওনার খুবই পরিচিত বন্ধু সম্পর্ক। ইনি হচ্ছেন আমাদের প্রাক্তন অর্থমন্ত্রী, অর্থনীতিবিদ, প্রখ্যাত প্রয়াত আবুল মাল আব্দুল মুহিত। তার কথাই উনি বারবার বলছেন। আমাদের উনি তখন বাংলাদেশ এম্বাসিতে, পাকিস্তান এম্বাসিতে কাজ করতেন এবং তিনি পাকিস্তান এম্বাসি ডিফেক্ট করেন এবং সেই দুঃসাহসের কথা উনি বলছেন যে সেই সময় পাকিস্তান এম্বাসি থেকে চাকরি ছেড়ে দিয়ে তারা যে সাহসিকতার পরিচয় দিয়েছেন এবং আরো কয়েকজন, সেটা তাদেরকেও সাংঘাতিক, তাদের কাছে আশ্চর্য লেগেছে এটা বলছেন। এবং উনি এটা আরো বললেন কয়েকটা ঘটনা, তারা তথ্য কিভাবে পেয়েছেন যে নিচের লেভেলে সেই সময় পাকিস্তান এম্বাসিতেই হয়তো এমন কোনো বাঙালি তখনও কাজ করতেন যারা লুকিয়ে কিছু তথ্য ডক্টর গ্রিনো এবং বাংলাদেশ ইনফরমেশন সেন্টারের কাছে এনে দিয়েছিলেন, যেখানে দেখানো ছিল, প্রামাণিক দলিল ছিল, ইট ওয়াজ ডকুমেন্টেড যে অস্ত্র দেওয়া হবে পাকিস্তান, তৎকালীন পাকিস্তান সরকারকে, এবং সেই অস্ত্র দিয়ে গণহত্যা চালানো হবে। তো এই প্রামাণিক, এবং এগুলো লুকিয়ে ওনার বাসার বল্টিমোর শহরে, উনি হপকিন্সে কাজ করতেন, জনস হপকিন্সে, ওনার দরজার সামনে সেই দলিলগুলো রেখে দেওয়া হয়েছিল। এবং এটা, এবং আবুল মাল আব্দুল মুহিত সাহেবের কাছেও সেই ডকুমেন্টগুলো যখন এসেছিল, তারা নিউ ইয়র্ক টাইমসের প্রখ্যাত সাংবাদিকদেরকে এটা দেওয়ার পরে ইট ওয়াজ কভার্ড বাই নিউ ইয়র্ক টাইমস ফ্রন্ট পেজ, প্রথম পৃষ্ঠায় এই খবরটা যখন হয় তখন এটা সারা পৃথিবীতে আলোড়ন সৃষ্টি করে এবং একটা প্রমাণ তখন সারা পৃথিবীতে চলে আসে যে গণহত্যা চালানোর জন্য অস্ত্র তৎকালীন মার্কিন যুক্তরাষ্ট্র, নিক্সন এবং হেনরি কিসিঞ্জার সরকার তারা পাকিস্তানে প্রেরণ করতে যাচ্ছে। এবং যখন এটা নিউ ইয়র্ক টাইমস ফ্রন্ট পেজে আসলো তখন এটা ধিক্কার উঠলো, প্রেস সাংঘাতিকভাবে ইনভলভ হলো এবং এই শিপমেন্ট, এই চালানগুলো বন্ধ হলো। That was the summary. Dr. Greenough, did you collect funds through Bangladesh Information Center? I remember you were talking about some bank accounts that Kissinger didn't want you to close because he was running after you. That's what you said.
I was persona non grata for the Henry Kissinger.
You were a persona non grata in the United States. In your own.
So, none of our lobbyists were paid. Lobbyists are often making a lot of money from companies they lobby for. No one was paid by the Bangladesh Information Center. I'm not sure we even paid.
How did you convince them?
Ran it well. The people who were in David Nayland and Kaiser Zaman and David Weisbrod, they were voluntary. Everything that had to do with his lobbying was voluntary. No one was paid.
Absolutely,
so actually,
yes.
we ended up. We attracted the attention. Actually, the presidential candidate. One of the largest hits we got was from a president candidate. I'm trying to think of his name, but anyway, we ended up. I ended up with a balance of around $2,000 in a Baltimore savings bank from the Bangladesh Information Center. Okay. And I tried to close the center, and Kissinger Nixon would not allow me to close it because I think they were hoping they could find something that would they could bring a case against the information center and perhaps against the people who, particularly myself. So I was never able to close it. So when I returned to Bangladesh in the late 1970s and early 1980s, when we transformed from the Cholera Research Laboratory to the International Center for Diarrhea Diseases Research, Bangladesh, we had a residual balance, and I decided the thing to do with it was to go ahead and give it to the women's program, one of the women's programs run by BRAC. So that's where the money ended up that was left over from the lobbying campaign. Because the lobbying campaign was grassroots, and really everyone bore their own expenses that participated, both local and Bangladeshi staff, so Bangladeshi lobbyists. So
it went to a good cause.
In a nutshell, the story of the Bangladesh Information Center is the residual money ended up with BRAC in a women's program. I don't remember exactly the program it went into, but that's probably BRAC has an account of that.
That's very good. Good to know that it went to a good cause, to BRAC, the money that you collected from Bangladesh Information Center, or for Bangladesh Information Center. Dr. Greenough, I would like to touch base very briefly about the blockade, the story, the Baltimore blockade, the blockade of the shipment. It was it was really brave. Bangladesh was not your country, yet you rode on a canoe with, not you, some Quakers from Philadelphia, New Jersey, and from Maryland, and you all went in front of a huge ship called Padma, and because Padma was loading arms for East Pakistan massacre. And what happened? Can you please picturize for our audience?
Yes.
Let me just brief my audience also that Dr. Greenough সেই কয়েকজনের একজন যারা বল্টিমোর হারবারে যখন পদ্মা এবং আরেকটা জাহাজ খুব সম্ভবত এই জাহাজে যখন অস্ত্র ভরা হচ্ছিল পূর্ব পাকিস্তানে নিয়ে যাওয়ার জন্য, তারা ছোট ছোট ডেঙ্গি নৌকায় করে সেই দিনের বেলায় সেই জাহাজের সামনে গিয়ে প্রতিবাদ করেছিলেন, এবং তারা ছোট ছোট প্ল্যাকার্ড করে, এটা অসম্ভব সাহসের একটা কাজ, যাতে জাহাজটা যদি তখন চালু হতো তাহলে তো তাদের উপর দিয়ে চলে যেত। এবং পাকিস্তান সরকার তখন মাফ করবেন, মার্কিন যুক্তরাষ্ট্র সরকার তখন তৎকালীন পাকিস্তান সরকারকে সাহায্য করছে, সো তারাও এনাদের অ্যারেস্ট করতে চাচ্ছে। তো এই সমস্ত কিছু রক্তচক্ষু উপেক্ষা করে তাদের এই যে সাহসিকতা, আমি এই ব্যাপারেই আরো জানতে চাচ্ছি। So let's continue, Dr. Greenough. Would you please give us more detailed pictures? Did you get arrested, first of all?
No, I'm actually a Nokamaji myself.
Nokamaji. That's a good role.
Small estate in the Union, but it's known as the Ocean State. So I was in love with boats for my childhood, and that actually became valuable because I worked out the water communications with Matlab between the Cholera Hospital in Dhaka and Matlab as my other duty besides being a physician. So yeah, and the other thing that preceded this, and they participated in, is that we had several of the Bangladeshi merchant seamen had defected from their ships in Baltimore Harbor, and they very bravely just jumped ship and gave up their careers. And
wow.
So they actually should be interviewed if you have a chance.
I will.
Qasem has a lot of interesting material himself, and they participated as well. The Quakers from Philadelphia, Oregon, Richard Taylor, organized the canoes, and we went out, and as the Padma was coming in, blocked it and shouted at the sailors. They shouted back at us, and
oh my goodness.
So it was, but it was, I wouldn't say it was very dangerous. I didn't think it. Anyway, I was happy to be out on the water, and it was late afternoon, and I realized that it was very likely that the police would interfere, and I simply stayed out paddling around and came in after dark. So I was one of my boat, and I forget who was in the front, who paddled with me that day. I should remember that. But we were never arrested because we came in after dark and simply.
Did anyone get arrested?
Oh yes.
Did anyone get arrested?
Yeah, the people who went being in by 5 or 6 o'clock were arrested and booked and so forth. So it was
they were booked too.
Peaceful protests by the Quakers. And I think they may have wanted to get arrested, so it made more of a story. I don't know the details on that, but it was important that some people got arrested because that brought it up into the news and so forth. So
that's how you create attention, I guess.
Yeah. So anyway, I was at that time responsible for taking care of patients at Hopkins, and so I felt I shouldn't be spending the time in jail. And so that was my excuse anyway.
So in your resume, Dr. Greenough, in your resume, you can also write down as your side profession, Naukar Maji.
Yeah, Naukar Maji. That was
yes, but this is amazing. And I can believe that I'm seeing someone in front of me, I'm taking interview, who actually participated in Baltimore blockade. I will continue our conversation from Baltimore blockade to, again, your love for Bangladesh. Let me tell to my audience that Dr. Greenough Bangladeshe 3 বার বেশি সময়ের জন্য ছিলেন। উনি একবার 60-এর দশকে বাংলাদেশে ছিলেন, সেটা 1962 থেকে 1967 সাল পর্যন্ত। তখনকার কলেরা হসপিটালে উনি সেখানে কাজ করতেন এবং সেই প্রসঙ্গে আমরা আসব, তার গল্প শুনবো, কেন উনি বাংলাদেশ বা সেই সময়কার পাকিস্তানকে, পূর্ব পাকিস্তানকে বেছে নিয়েছিলেন। পরবর্তীতে বাংলাদেশের স্বাধীনতার পরপরই 72 সালে উনি কয়েক মাসের জন্য বাংলাদেশে গিয়েছিলেন এবং ওখানে ইন্টারন্যাশনাল রেস্কিউ কমিটি যেটা ছিল, সেই ইন্টারন্যাশনাল রেস্কিউ কমিটির কাজ সংগঠিত করার জন্য উনি বাংলাদেশে ছিলেন, স্বাধীন বাংলাদেশে। এবং সবশেষে উনি বড় সময়ের জন্য বাংলাদেশে ছিলেন 1977 থেকে 1985 সালে, যেই সময়টায় উনি আইসিডিডিআরবি ডিরেক্টর হিসেবে কাজ করেছেন এবং এই হাসপাতালকে সারা বিশ্বের একটা মডেল হাসপাতাল হিসাবে এবং ডায়রিয়াল ডিজিজ চিকিৎসার জন্য একটা মডেল প্রতিষ্ঠান হিসাবে দাঁড় করিয়ে দিয়ে গিয়েছেন। এই ব্যাপারে আমরা তার কাছে বিস্তারিত শুনছি। প্রথমেই আমি ডক্টর গ্রিনোকে প্রশ্ন করতে চাই যে পৃথিবীর এত দেশ ছেড়ে উনি সেই সময় পূর্ব পাকিস্তান কেন বেছে নিয়েছিলেন? উনি হার্ভার্ড মেডিকেল স্কুল থেকে পাশ করা, বিশ্বের শ্রেষ্ঠতম মেডিকেল স্কুল যেখান থেকে উনি পাশ করেছেন। উনি চাইলে যে কোনো জায়গায়, মার্কিন যুক্তরাষ্ট্রে বা ইউরোপের যে কোনো জায়গায় উনি যেতে পারতেন এবং প্রতিষ্ঠিত হতে পারতেন। কেন উনি বাংলাদেশকে বেছে নিলেন? Dr. Greenough, I'm coming back to you, asking you the same question. Why East Pakistan? Why Bangladesh? What's your love for Bangladesh? Why did you pick up right after your graduation and training from Harvard Medical School? You could have ended up into any best institution in the world, but why there? Why in Southeast Asia?
Well, from the time I entered college in 1949, the United States was at war in Korea, and there was a draft. So I was classified 1A. That's physically good health for military service. But they were deferring physicians through their college and medical school education, intending them to go into the military as doctors later on. And I succeeded in being deferred through college, medical school, my fellowship with Dr. E. Donald Thomas in Cooperstown, New York. And but I knew I had to serve. I owed the U.S. government 2 years of my life, and I was looking for a way to serve that would be constructive for health in a country that we were then calling developing, whatever euphemism is now, South, poor country. And so I had written a lot of letters. The Peace Corps was just forming at that time, and I thought that was a good idea. I supported it. But then a friend of mine who I had interned with at Columbia Presbyterian Hospital knew I was interested in this, and he was at NIH, and they were looking for someone to staff the cholera, Pakistan Ceto Cholera Research Laboratory in Dhaka. And he said he thought he knew someone who might be willing to do that, and he put my name in the ring, and I got a call from Dr. Robert S. Gordon Jr., who was the scientific director appointed of the cholera research project in Bangladesh and then East Pakistan. And he called me up and said if I'd like to go to Dhaka. At that time, I apologize. I didn't know where Dhaka was. I thought he was saying Dakar, and I had always been reading about Africa.
Africa.
So, in fact, after I got to Bangladesh, and was traveling, my luggage off and ended up in Dakar. So anyway, I found out, and in July of 1965, I and my family arrived in then East Pakistan, and we began the work to prepare a unit that could study cholera, take care of cholera patients. Now, if there wasn't a way to save cholera patients at that time, if you got cholera, the mortality rate was somewhere between 40 and 50%.
Oh, very high.
It's one of the most rapidly fatal of all bacterial infectious diseases.
Yes.
But it's simply by draining fluid from the body. So the first job, a bit of history here, is the National Naval Medical Research Unit in Taiwan, headed by Captain Robert Phillips, had done research in Bangkok in 1961. The paper was published in 62, which measured the actual composition of what the fluid lost in cholera stool. So we knew what had to be replaced intravenously.
Yes.
And we made our own. When I came to Bangladesh and admitted the first cholera patient to the hospital in the end of November 1962, we were making our own intravenous fluids because there weren't any on the market in Bangladesh at that time. And we made a solution that mimicked the composition of what was lost. And if we could get a patient that still had a heartbeat and get an intravenous into that patient, they all survived.
Okay.
And then it was quite clear the following year we had epidemic cholera coming from a refugee situation after some altercation between Bihari, Bengali, Hindu, Muslim in the Lakshmi Narayan jute mill. The big epidemic broke out there, and Dr. Gordon and I went down to see where our patients were coming from. We found many cholera patients. We ran out of intravenous fluid in about 30 minutes, and there was nothing we could do except separate the sick from the poor from the well and bring whoever could make it to Dhaka to the cholera hospital alive, get them there. I knew that afternoon, it was a sunny Sunday afternoon, that intravenous fluids are not going to be available because cholera breaks out in terrible poverty situations, crowding, and wars and refugee situations. And so it was clear there had to be another way. And by that time, we as physicians knew there was a other way the intestine can absorb salt and water. It's called it's now known as SGLT1. It's the sodium glucose linked transport. And the Navy unit in Namru 2 had shown in cholera patients in 1960 or 61 that they could, cholera patients could absorb salt and water oral solution if glucose were added to it. They had made a mistake and made the solutions too concentrated, and it aggravated the purging and increased their or disordered their body composition. So it was not successful. So the cholera hospital, the younger people that came out after I had set up with Dr. Gordon, set up the cholera hospital and learned how to take care of cholera patients with intravenous fluid. So our mortality rate when we were treating directly, they were coming to the Mohawk Cholera Hospital, our mortality rate was less than 1% at that point.
Great success from 40% to 1%.
Yeah, and the younger people, David Nayland, John Rhodey, there were a number of younger people that had been trained in the physiology of the small intestine and this unique pathway by which the body, even with purging diarrhea, can absorb salt and water if glucose were added. Yeah. And the group in Calcutta, led by Dr. Charles Carpenter, who I later worked with, both showed simultaneously, in my view, that oral hydration was a way you could treat cholera patients. And that took a great deal of sophisticated research, both in Dhaka and Calcutta, to prove the point. And it was proven. And Dr. David Nayland and Majid Mullah, Richard Cash, demonstrated, I think in 1966 or 65, I don't know the exact date, but in that period, after we'd shown in the hospital that oral hydration worked, took it to the field in Matlab and showed they could sustain cholera patients with no IVs once they were hydrated by using the new oral hydration solution. That was a paper published in Lancet in 67, I believe, and was a watershed moment in showing a new and inexpensive way to save many lives who had cholera in desperate refugee or poverty situations. The thing that took it global was an observation during the war of Bangladesh liberation, when the refugees poured into Calcutta area in the salt camp, and cholera broke out there. And the Hopkins group, who were led by Dr. Thomas Simpson and Dilip Mahalanobis, who was a pediatrician in the group in Calcutta, said, well, we don't have any IVs, but we know about oral hydration. Let's see if it works in a desperate situation. So they made packets of the appropriate composition. They took them to the salt camp. They gave instructions, not to health workers, but the families. And they showed and documented in a publication later on by 1970, I think it was published in 1973 or 74 in the Johns Hopkins Medical Journal, that they could lower the mortality rate which was running between 30 and 40% in the salt camps, cholera victims, down to about 3%, so a 10-fold lowering.
Wow, what a great discovery.
And that was noted by the World Health Organization, and that, that's something we need to incorporate in our global health program.
Dr. Greenough, you were mentioning about the precursor of orsaline, or the discovery of orsaline, especially as a field case during the 1971 refugee camp, or during the 1971 when the refugee moved to Calcutta, and few of the doctors from Cholera Hospital who tested the solution on the patients. Can you please update us a little bit more?
Yes, I think it's important to go back for a minute to there were two groups working on cholera in parallel. One was a group from Johns Hopkins University led by Dr. Charles Carpenter and with Indian colleagues, and the other was the group with the cholera hospital in Dhaka. I was with the cholera hospital in Dhaka, had no connection to Johns Hopkins at that point.
Okay.
So when the refugees during the war flooded into the neighboring areas to Calcutta, now Kolkata, the salt camps, cholera broke out. And the group with Hopkins and Calcutta, and we were exchanging data. We both had the similar composition of oral hydration, and the group at that point, it was the Calcutta group that took the initiative when cholera broke out and no IVs or doctors to treat cholera were available, that they taught the families of cholera victims in the salt camps how to make and administer oral hydration. And they were able to show that they could, there were no IVs at all available. So an Indian pediatrician, Dr. Dalit Mahalanobis, and Dr. Thomas Simpson from Hopkins took packets and the information to the families of refugees in the salt camp and taught them how to make it themselves. And they were able to demonstrate in collecting data that the mortality rate from cholera with no IVs available, just oral hydration, could be taken from something over 40% down to about 3%.
That's huge.
Which is this is with no doctors, no IVs, no ambulances, no hospitals.
Absolutely.
Just in a disorganized refugee setting. That information, which was published, I believe, in 1978 in the Johns Hopkins Medical Journal, was picked up by the World Health Organization. And they recruited a senior person, a very important person with the cholera group, who was Dr. Diman Barua, went to Geneva. He recruited someone from Dhaka who was working with me in epidemiology, Dr. Michael Merson, and they initiated what was called the Control Program for Diarrheal Diseases, which was a global program designed to implement the use of these new discoveries from Bangladesh and Calcutta into the global arena. So that was done, and then subsequently was incorporated into not only WHO but the UNICEF program for children globally, and by so doing, they were able to demonstrate over a period of about 5 or 6 years that they could reduce the under 4-year-old mortality on the planet from something around 14 million down to something less than 2 million, based on four things that UNICEF propagated. One was making sure children are growing properly. The second was oral hydration. Third was breastfeeding, and fourth was immunization. It was called the GOBI program. And this was of which oral hydration was the second leg of that program. That was highly successful to the present day. And that's was what was very rapidly, what was just discovered at a scientific and metabolic unit level globally in less than, let's see, it'd be 1965 probably to 1975 or 80. So it's 10 or 15 years on something that was an original discovery in Bangladesh and in India was taken globally. It's probably the most rapid translation of sophisticated medical research into a global program that I'm aware of, and highly successfully. And that's, of course, continued. The use of oral hydration has spread globally since then. The vaccine's a different story, though.
Okay.
A different story.
So to summarize what you said, that the field work that was done in Calcutta on the refugee from Bangladesh, the successful results and the data were taken to WHO, and when WHO implemented the data into actions, the outcome resulted in huge reduction in children death or decline in children death rate in the world, right?
Yeah, so, we incorporated into a simple program for child survival. It went global within a decade of this, of the original discovery. Excuse me.
Right.
The original discovery.
মাত্র এক দশকের মধ্যে বা 12 বছরের মধ্যে এক যুগের মধ্যে ছোট্ট পরীক্ষাগুলো করা হয়েছিল কলকাতায় শরণার্থী শিবিরে, ডায়রিয়া কমিয়ে আনার জন্য, কলেরা কমিয়ে আনার জন্য এখান থেকেই কয়েকজন চিকিৎসক বিশ্ব স্বাস্থ্য সংস্থায় যোগ দেন এবং তাদের আপ্রাণ চেষ্টায় এবং ভবিষ্যতে WHO শিশু মৃত্যু রোধে এই ডেটার উপর ভিত্তি করেই যে পরিকল্পনা এবং কার্যক্রম বিশ্বব্যাপী ইমপ্লিমেন্ট করে, তাতে শিশু মৃত্যুর হার সারা পৃথিবীতে অবিশ্বাস্য রকমের নিচে কমিয়ে আনা গেছে। শিশু মৃত্যু হার কমে এসেছে। এটা একটা বিশাল সাফল্য, বিরাট সাফল্য। এবং ছোট্ট ওর স্যালাইন, ছোট্ট একটা আবিষ্কার, ছোট আমি বলবো না, এটা একটা বিশাল আবিষ্কার, কিন্তু ছোট একটা প্যাকেটের মধ্যে আমি বলবো ইন আ স্যাশে, life in a sachet, if I can summarize the discovery of
that's a good aphorism.
Yes, ছোট্ট প্যাকেটে জীবনের আবাহন, সেটা বলতে পারি ওর স্যালাইনে। Dr. Greenough, I will now ask you about why you said that your journey began like since you graduated from Harvard, and then you wanted to go to Dakar in Africa. Instead, you found yourself in Dhaka, the similar names. But who funded this program on diarrheal disease, and what was the intention? Why there were programs that were funded all the way in East Pakistan on cholera and diarrheal disease? I'm just curious to know about the history.
Yeah, the history was the Korean War, which reestablished after World War II the draft in the United States because they couldn't get enough volunteers for the military. And I was looking for alternative service, but ended up being recruited into what's called a uniform service, the U.S. Public Health Service. Okay. So actually, I was in not the gun shooting military, but the public health, which is called a uniform service, not a military service. And
you're the good cop. You're the good cop.
The reason was that the United States wanted to do something that would be useful for saving lives while it was indulging in a war in Southeast Asia. And cholera was chosen because of the original information from the Naval Medical Research Unit in Taipei that there were several breakthroughs. The biggest breakthrough before arriving in Dhaka was a publication of what was the composition of the fluid loss from the diarrhea in cholera. And that was measured in a cholera epidemic in Bangkok in 1960 or 61. And that allowed one to know what had to be replaced in composition and volume in cholera patients to save their lives. And the other piece of that was this arcane basic physiology discovery of SGLT1, or sodium glucose linked transport. And when we and the Hopkins group in Calcutta arrived, we were aware of that, and the question was that damaged or blocked in cholera victims? And the answer was, after some very careful, very sophisticated research in both Dhaka at the Cholera Hospital in Calcutta at the Hopkins group, that indeed that channel was available even in heavily purging cholera patients. You can think of it as a number 18 needle directly into the portal vein.
Oh my God! Yes,
people don't. It's hard to describe. It's an arcane. I mean, this came out of Harvard Biophysics Laboratory in the 1960s, and the Air Force. This was a very sophisticated. It was published not in medical journals, but in basic science journals. The best publication was that we were all aware of was the Journal of General Physiology. So it was taking immediately. John Rohde, who worked in Dhaka at the cholera lab, made an aphorism. He said it was taking science to where the diarrhea was. So they took the basic science from the sophisticated physiology, basic physiology, into the field
Okay.
for cholera victims. And that translated, as we pointed out, into a global program saving millions of lives of the kids under 4 years old and a number of adults too. So it's in my mind, it's a story of how basic science is so important to big advances in medicine.
Yes.
And also science has a way of forgetting, because right now, the hottest anti-diabetic drug on the market is blocking the glucose transporter in the intestines so diabetics can't absorb glucose. And there is nothing in that literature that refers to oral hydration. I'm working on that now.
Good luck with that, Dr. Greenough. Good luck. We need more research from you.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the in a nutshell the story.
Okay. As we know that you had been in Bangladesh or East Pakistan a couple of times, since you are with us today, I would also like to request you to share the stories of formation of the ICDDR-B. We have a very interesting name. It has a B in a parenthesis, and it was formerly Cholera Hospital. So how did it evolve? You just mentioned that it was funded by U.S. government, the initial money in 60s.
No, the ICDDR-B was not funded by U.S. government.
No, the Cholera Hospital before.
No, the reason, because of the war, the United States was on the wrong side, Henry Kissinger and Nixon.
Yes.
And, they didn't, as I said, I couldn't close the Bangladesh Information Center because I was persona non grata by the United States at that point. So the ICDDR-B, no way you could take U.S. military supporting an entity in the country that the U.S. had assaulted through Pakistan. Okay. So the challenge was what to do. And what was done was the Ford Foundation, David Bell, Lincoln Chen, came up with the idea that we could follow the model of the international agricultural centers and make the cholera hospital, the Pakistan CEDO, into an international health research center, which had not been done before. And so Ford Foundation gave funds, which Henry Mosley, Lincoln Chen, myself were supported as we evolved a plan to do this. In I returned in 1977 to Bangladesh, probably 1975, 76. We worked on that idea. Ford Foundation then put sufficient funds in to fund what was then the cholera hospital. And UNT agreed to try to take it internationally. And then ensued a series of negotiations between the government of Bangladesh, the UNDP, and what was done was the charter for the International Agricultural Center, ICRISAT. That document was modified to be what was called initially the International Health and Population Research, which ended up being ICDDR-B. The negotiation involved that Bangladesh wanted to be recognized as hosting an international center. Now, to this date, none of the other international centers recognize the host country, so this is unique to Bangladesh. And so originally, I think it was the Secretary of Health, Dr. Anwar, I don't think I know he's a doctor, but Anwar fought to have an International Center for Diarrheal Diseases Research, Bangladesh. And the negotiation boiled it down to comma B. It is the only international center, I believe, on the planet that recognizes a host country. I think any international center were in America should recognize what the host country contributes. But this is the only one that did it. It was a unique complication of the Bangladeshi negotiators to achieve that. and it took I was sat in on a couple of the negotiations. Henry Moseley sat through them all. He was the first director of ICDDRB. So that was the story on the comma B, unique to Bangladesh. The second part is the genius of Bangladesh, in which they linked to the International Center, have incorporated the science from the center, which included oral hydration and the new oral cholera vaccines. And I think that's really important because it meant that the host country was invested in the findings that came out of the center. And that spread into BRAC, in the national program for making oral hydration available throughout the village through the BRAC program. I think it was very important that that happened. And so it also has, I think, linked many other things that the center has discovered and moved them into the government programs with really breathtaking speed. When you think about what the mortality rate, I think the life expectancy in Bangladesh was something under or close to 40 years when I first arrived in 1962. This year, we have very accurate data from MATLAB for the whole time since the start of the cholera hospital. The life expectancy in rural Bangladesh, the MATLAB area, now is the same as or slightly exceeds the life expectancy in the United States of America. And the birth rate, of course, has dropped markedly into where the population is fairly stable at this point.
That's so good news. Absolutely, that's so good news.
But I don't know other countries that have accomplished this. I think Bangladesh is unique in its willingness to support an international center, work with it, and assimilate its data into government programs so rapidly. I mean, this is really remarkable. And probably the most remarkable thing that's come out. I mean, Bangladesh economy was not very good. Pakistan was exploiting Bangladesh. I believe now Bangladesh's economy, which originally was based on jute and leather, is now based, I think the second biggest import beyond garments is sophisticated high-grade pharmaceuticals at this point.
Yes,
so this is a
very famous
change over a period of less than my lifetime, which is remarkable.
Bangladeshis are so happy, of course, to know from you, an observer from outside, your comments on Bangladesh. Of course, we are proud of our country and the manpower. Talking about manpower and human resources, I'm sure besides discovery, the ICDDRB is also developing, providing with good training. We know that we have a Bangladeshi director right now for the first time. Dr. Tahmid is the director of ICDDRB. Very proud of the accomplishments of the Bangladeshi scientists and physicians.
If I move my head, you can see a photograph of a drawing of the cholera hospital with Tommy Ahmed's name on it when he was a young investigator.
Oh, okay. And I see a rickshaw also on the picture. There is a picture.
A rickshaw delivering a cholera patient. It was given to me when I left in 1985. So it's quite a remarkable story.
Achievement.
And we haven't said much about the vaccine, but the vaccine was very much in the news. One of the subsequent directors to me was David Sack, and he has been working in the oral cholera vaccine. Now, the main reason the MATLAB was set up was to test cholera vaccines. When I arrived in Dhaka in 1962, it was an international requirement to have an injection of cholera vaccine before anyone could travel on the planet.
Okay.
And the question was it any good? Was it any good? It had a lot of side effects. And the first step, and Henry Moseley led this, was to show that that vaccine was not effective and had a lot of side effects. That was step number one. Step number two was, after we discovered the mechanism of cholera and the toxin, which is an achievement of an Indian scientist, Dr. S.N. Day, we were able to take a component of the toxin that was not toxic and make it into an oral vaccine. And I remember because before I left Dhaka in 1985, drinking in Matlab with the then health secretary a dose of the new oral vaccine so people wouldn't be afraid of it. That now is evolved into a much less costly oral vaccine. And the problem is that because we're currently having an exacerbation of cholera globally, there's not sufficient vaccine for the 2 doses that give you the best immunity. And so Dr. Sack was commenting in the magazine Science this week that they should not give up the 2nd dose, since that gave booster protection. Just as we have a booster for COVID, we have a booster for the oral vaccine is essentially side effect free and not like COVID vaccine. It's a very safe vaccine.
Okay.
And so that's the other big achievement of the cholera hospital ICDDRB was getting rid of an ineffective vaccine, and through the work on basic science on cholera, establishing an oral vaccine that's inexpensive and very effective.
Raise up hope. All this good news from you, Dr. Greenough. Coming back to you about what you were doing, you are still working, and the information that I didn't communicate much is that besides being your contribution to medicine in diarrheal diseases, you are also a world-renowned geriatrician. And we know that in terms of geriatrics medicine, for sure, Bangladesh is not that point well off. I don't remember exactly the data, but by 2050, I guess our geriatric population will be doubled, if not a little less or around there. We need geriatric medicine there. What are your thoughts as a world-renowned geriatrician and working at Johns Hopkins? You were talking about something home health or some of the innovative measures that you have taken at Johns Hopkins.
Yes, when I came back in 1985 and joined what was then the nascent or just forming division of geriatric medicine under John Burton. And we believed, he and I, and then younger people who were leading the charges, that the model of a centralized hospital was not a good one for probably anyone, but particularly older people, and that any technology that would be useful needed to be taken to the home. Now, that I took directly from my experience with cholera, because we quickly learned in Matlab, which is an extensive area with slow country boat traffic, that the oral hydration and intravenous had to be given locally in the villages rather than having people come on a country boat for many hours to a central facility in Matlab itself. So actually, the idea that we have now demonstrated in geriatrics, called hospital at home, is that the technology that older people generally need can be delivered to the home much less costly and much more comfortably for the older person by not having to come to the emergency room or into the hospital, which is a very dangerous place for older people. They fall out of bed, they break their hip, they get the wrong medicines, et cetera, et cetera. So the work from the start, first thing I did when I got back was show that the diarrhea in long-term care was due to Clostridium difficile. That was the first paper that I wrote with my young colleagues after coming back to Johns Hopkins Hospital, Bayview. Then a series of papers that are now beginning to be mainstream, led now by Dr. Bruce Leff, but initiated by Dr. Burton and myself, is called Hospital at Home, because much of the technology that's really effective for older people can be taken home, and for much less cost, for much better comfort for that person than having to sit for hours in the emergency room and enter the hospital with the highly resistant hospital-acquired infections and disorientation, delirium, etc. This has all been shown in a series of papers under this rubric of hospital at home. That is now beginning to be picked up, but it will take a quantum change in American medicine to achieve it. So what I'm praying is that Bangladesh will not follow the current American model, but will pick up hospital at home and take it to the next level. And that would be my hope, that Bangladesh would again innovate and not adopt what is a highly flawed model for taking care of older individuals. I don't want to go to a nursing home. No one likes to go to a nursing home. And this is a quantum shift in thinking about, and it really, in my mind, I learned it in Bangladesh, and my colleagues at Hopkins have taken it to the next level, but it still has an uphill fight because it's harder for corporations to make money out of taking care of people at home than putting them incarcerating them in nursing homes.
Right.
And so that's the challenge, that Bangladesh again has to innovate and not follow the current model of geriatric care as exhibited in the West.
Right. Thank you so much, Dr. Greenough, for your thoughts on geriatric care. Let me summarize it for my audience. আমি প্রফেসর গ্রিনোকে প্রশ্ন করেছিলাম যে বাংলাদেশে জেরিয়াট্রিক মেডিসিন, যেটা প্রবীণদের জন্য যে চিকিৎসা, সেই চিকিৎসা ব্যবস্থা আরো ভালোভাবে হওয়া উচিত, আরো হাসপাতাল হওয়া উচিত, কিংবা এই ব্যাপারে আরো হচ্ছে, আমাদের সরকার করছেন, কিন্তু এটা পরবর্তী ধাপে চলে যাওয়া উচিত। কারণ আগামী 20-30 বছরের মধ্যে বাংলাদেশে প্রবীণ জনসংখ্যা, যেহেতু আমাদের গড় আয়ু বেড়েছে, প্রবীণ জনসংখ্যা বৃদ্ধি পাবে। সেজন্য আমাদের নিজেদের জন্যই এই মেডিসিনের এই বিভাগটাকে আরো আধুনিক করে রাখা উচিত। ডক্টর গ্রিনো বললেন যে উনি বাংলাদেশ থেকে কলেরা চিকিৎসা করতে গিয়ে যে শিক্ষাটা নিয়ে এসেছেন আমেরিকাতে, এখন উনি জনস হপকিন্সের প্রফেসর এমেরিটাস, উনি বললেন যে সেই বাংলাদেশের শিক্ষাটাই আসলে আইডিয়াল বা আদর্শ শিক্ষা হওয়া উচিত। উনি নিজে এখানকার চিকিৎসা ব্যবস্থার সাথে জড়িত, কিন্তু উনি বললেন যে এখানকার যে চিকিৎসা ব্যবস্থা, আমি সেই চিকিৎসা ব্যবস্থা পছন্দ করছি না, কারণ এতে বারবার হাসপাতালে যাওয়ার প্রবণতা থাকবে, ইমার্জেন্সিতে যেতে হবে। মানুষ যখন বয়স হয়ে যাবে, বুড়ো হয়ে যাবে, তাদেরকে ইমার্জেন্সি মেডিসিনে, নার্সিং হোমে কাটাতে হবে। এখানে যেই জিনিসটা ওনারা চেষ্টা করছেন সেটা হচ্ছে হসপিটাল অ্যাট হোম, বা হাসপাতালকে বাসায় নিয়ে যাওয়ার কিছু করা যায় কিনা। যখন মানুষ প্রবীণ হয়ে যাবে, বয়স হয়ে যাবে, তখন তাদেরকে যেন ঘন ঘন হাসপাতালে আসতে না হয়, বাসাতে বসেই যেন তারা চিকিৎসা সেবা পেতে পারে। সেই যে এই ধরনের একটা কিছু তারা করছেন, এবং এই জিনিসটা তারা চাচ্ছেন যে আমেরিকাতে আরো বেশিভাবে প্রচলিত হোক। যদিও উনি বলছেন যে এখানে কর্পোরেট ব্যবস্থা, যেহেতু যারা এটাতে টাকা ঢালে, ব্যবসায়ীরা, তারা চাইবে না যে মানুষ হাসপাতালে বাসায় বসেই চিকিৎসা সেবা হোক, তাহলে হাসপাতালের টাকাটা আসবে না। কিন্তু উনি বলছেন যে আসলে যখন মানুষ বয়স বাড়বে, তখন হসপিটাল অ্যাট হোম অধিকাংশ রোগের জন্যই বাসায় বসেই চিকিৎসা সেবাটা আমাদের গ্রহণ করা উচিত, এবং সেই পথে আমরা আগাচ্ছি, এবং সেই পথে উনি গবেষণাও করছেন এই বয়সে মার্কিন যুক্তরাষ্ট্রে বসেও। Dr. Greenough, we are almost towards the end of the program. Thank you so much. You narrated history to us and to our audience. I would like to ask you my last question. Your observation on Bangladesh. You have observed Bangladesh from before the birth of the country, and we just recently celebrated our 50 years of independence. What are your observations on Bangladeshis and changes of Bangladesh? Did we win the upheaval battle? And last question. After that, I have a last question too, but I want to request to say something or comment something.
Let me. Bangladesh has a unique culture historically, and I can't go into that, but it's a unique culture, and has been able to assimilate something from the West in terms of science and technology, and make it its own rather than following the current Western models. It has taken basic discoveries and been able to get them throughout the population at really fairly low cost. And I don't know any other country that's been able to do this. So Bangladesh is a leader in translation of science into effective interventions to preserve the health and welfare of its population. It's a very coherent culture that's highly innovative and quite unique, I think, in that regard. In fact, so unique that Bangladesh has become a world leader. Right now, the ICDDRB is educating young researchers from what we call now South, but what used to be called developing countries globally, rather than just in Bangladesh. And one of my jobs now is to help with advising on the endowment for the center so that we can establish more fellowships and things for scientists that are working in Africa and what we call the South now. We used to be called developing countries. So Bangladesh is in less than a generation become a leader in the charge to take what's effective technology and science to where it's most needed. There's a big job to be done, but I see Bangladesh in the next 50 years as a critically important leader in the charge to translate what's really effective, life-saving measures for the population into practice. It's a huge challenge, but Bangladesh is, I think, capable of it. And the baton has been passed from us that came from the West to those that are working in the real world of the challenges of poverty and chaos and a lot of things that are going on the planet. And Bangladesh has its own huge problem, which is the climate change issue, which we can't go into today. But I would point out that I think the Western technology of building dams to keep the water out won't work. And the ancient technology Bangladesh evolved, which I saw when I was spending time in the Ganges Delta, is that you build up the earth so that it's above the flood. And I think that that is going to be much more of an answer to climate change than any technology we currently are trying to employ in Europe or the West. But unfortunately, the West came in and built some dikes around even Dhaka city. So that's a challenge for Bangladesh to lead the world in how we take an ancient technology and employ it to be able to live with climate change. So that'd be my part. I think Bangladesh has a huge job ahead of it. And
yes, Dr. Greenough. I'm sure the resilient Bangladeshis will take it to the next step.
I'm sure they will too. I'm confident.
At a global level, of course. Thanks for all the good wishes and thanks for all your contributions. You are part of history, and it's my honor, it's our honor to interview you for this program. My last question is, do you like dal bhat?
I love dal bhat.
You love? Can you cook?
I think you haven't mentioned, but I have family in Dhaka at the present time. I have.
Yes, I haven't mentioned.
My wife's family lives in Dhaka, and so I have a special attachment to the country, and
So
I'm
we
honored to have been able to work in such an amazing culture and a country that is absolutely unique in what it's done in the last 50 years. And it has bigger challenges ahead, but I'm confident it will meet them.
Sure. And Dr. Greenough, you know that since you just mentioned about your attachment to Bangladesh in terms of from your in-laws, auntie is from Bangladesh.
Yes.
And so you know that our culture highly regards or treats the jamai, the mayor jamai othoba. So you are the jamai of our country, of Bangladesh. Anytime you come to Bangladesh, we all will again treat you as our jamai of our country. Right?
Right.
Okay. Okay. Thank you again, Dr. Greenough. It's an honor, heartfelt gratitude for your time. প্রিয় দর্শক বৃন্দ, আমাদের বিজয় দিবসের এই অনুষ্ঠানের সবচেয়ে বড় পাওয়া অধ্যাপক গ্রিনোকে এবং তার কাছে তার আবিষ্কার, তার মেডিকেল জীবন, তার চিকিৎসা বিজ্ঞানে তার যাত্রা এবং সর্বোপরি বাংলাদেশের সাথে তার যে হৃদ্যতা, তার যে হৃদয়ের সম্পর্ক এবং বাংলাদেশের স্বাধীনতা সময়ের সাথে সেই সময়কালীন সময়ে বাংলাদেশের জন্য কাজ করা, এই সব কিছু তাকে একজন বিশাল ব্যক্তিত্বে পরিণত করেছে। বাংলাদেশের বন্ধু পদক পেয়েছেন বাংলাদেশের সরকারের কাছ থেকে, কিন্তু তার চেয়ে বড় পুরস্কার যেটা আমি মনে করি সেটা হলো বাংলাদেশিদের ভালোবাসা। এর কোনো অর্থমূল্য নেই। Dr. Greenough, we love you. Thank you for your contributions for our country, and you play a role, whatever scale it is, small and big. That's why we are here today. And I'm getting emotional, but thank you so much for
my
all
pleasure.
the contributions. Okay.
It's been fun, and thank you for taking the interest. Appreciate it.
আপনি ভালো থাকবেন।
জি, ভালো আছি। চলো।
জি।
আচ্ছা, খোদা
আসসালামু
হাফেজ।
আলাইকুম। খোদা হাফেজ। সুধীবৃন্দ, অসংখ্য ধন্যবাদ এতক্ষণ ধৈর্য ধরে আমাদের সাথে থাকার জন্য। ডক্টর উইলিয়াম গ্রিনোর কথাগুলো মন্ত্রমুগ্ধের মতো আমরা শুনছিলাম। বাংলাদেশের সাথে, বাংলাদেশের ইতিহাসের সাথে তার জড়িত থাকার ঘটনা, বাংলাদেশকে সাহায্য করার ঘটনা এবং সেই সাথে চিকিৎসা বিজ্ঞানে তার অনন্য অবদানের কথা। এই ব্যক্তিত্ব ডক্টর গ্রিনো যেন তার গবেষণা কর্ম চালিয়ে যেতে পারেন সেই শুভকামনা করছি। তার কথার সূত্র ধরেই আমরা সেই আশাবাদটা আবারও ব্যক্ত করছি যে ডক্টর গ্রিনোর গবেষণা অনুযায়ী বলছে যে বাংলাদেশের মানুষের গড় আয়ু এখন আমেরিকার মানুষের গড় আয়ু থেকেও কিছুটা ছাড়িয়ে গিয়েছে। এটা অসম্ভব ভালো লাগার অনুভূতি। আমরা আশা করছি পরবর্তী প্রজন্ম আমাদের এই ধারাবাহিকতা অক্ষুণ্ণ রাখবে, বাংলাদেশকে বিশ্বের দরবারে অবশ্যই আরো উঁচুতে নিয়ে যাবে। বিজয়ের দিনে, মহান বিজয় দিবসের দিনে এই শুভ কামনা ব্যক্ত করে আপনাদের সবার জন্য শুভেচ্ছা জানিয়ে আমরা অনুষ্ঠান শেষ করছি। আশা করছি আপনারা বাঙালিয়ানা চ্যানেল সাবস্ক্রাইব করবেন এবং ভবিষ্যতে আমাদের আরো এরকম নতুন নতুন অনুষ্ঠান উপহারের সুযোগ করে দিবেন। ভালো থাকবেন।